Eric, coding agents and enterprise agents. All we've been talking about on this podcast is enterprise agents. And the feeling I get here in San Francisco is nobody wants to talk to me about enterprise agents. All we're talking about is coding agents. So, this podcast, we really want to focus on coding agents and the difference between enterprise agents. I'm John Miller,
My name is Eric Broda.
and this is the Agentic Mesh Podcast. Okay. Now, what I love about this topic is that when I think I am talking the same language to my cohorts in San Francisco, I realize that my frame of reference is always different. I'm always thinking about business domain context. I'm thinking about business processes. I'm thinking about compliance and audit and, all of the things you and I have done for 20 plus years of consulting and working as a senior executive in banking. And so you and I know this well. And what is very well known here in the software engineering community, the tech community here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, is coding agents. And that is what everybody's talking about. And so I'm excited that we're going to go through a few different points of view on how to compare and contrast. We're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of coding agents. What are some of the strengths and limitations? And we're going to talk about enterprise agents and why business context matters, maybe a little bit about architecture and spec-driven design. And then how are these two seemingly dissimilar type of agents the same? So that's a lot to swallow. So I hope you're buckled up and ready for the ride.
I'm game. I got my seatbelts on, my protective headgear here. So there's a lot.
Yeah, let's start with something fun, man. What's your experience with coding agents?
So here's the deal. I use them quite a bit, but I will admit that I probably am not as sophisticated as some of the folks in San Francisco. So I use ChatGPT, and I do, unfortunately, I know this is going to make me sound retro. I do the cut and paste thing. Now, I do that for a particular reason. It works for me. But here's the thing. I know I'm going to be using Claude Code tomorrow and some of the other tools. And you know why? Quite frankly, because they work. The second thing is, as it relates to this discussion, there's a lot to be learned in a field like coding agents, which is very, very advanced, that can be applied directly to enterprise agents. So, John, like you, I'm extremely excited about this. I'm anxious to hear what's going on in the Bay Area and just as interested in figuring how we can leverage some of the best practices up here.
Yeah, okay. So I hear everybody starting with, their first coding job and a lot of control C's, a lot of control V's. The cut and paste. It used to be in the olden days when Stack Overflow was the thing. That's where people would grab some code, do some modification. Now maybe we're writing our code, maybe we're writing a prompt and getting ChatGPT to generate it. That was my first project with coding with ChatGPT. And this is before Codex was released. They didn't really have a developer platform where they were trying to create coding agents. And, it was fascinating. And I did a talk at DAMA LA last summer about what I learned. And essentially, I learned that it was still really early if you're using only the chat interface and thinking that that's the best in class coding agents. And everybody kind of said in August, hey, buddy, I know you data engineers are thinking about it one way, but take a look at what us software engineers and how we're looking at it. And that's when I started to realize, oh, Cursor, Anthropic's Claude Code, and all of the other developer tools that are emerging around this space, including open source options for it. So my early experience was, hey, I could learn how to do some very basic Python, some basic Streamlit, use some Python libraries I'd never tried, built a knowledge graph. I'd never done that. Did all that stuff last year. And I actually put the repo in public on GitHub. I'm embarrassed to tell people where to find it because it's so bad. And actually, this would be a good experiment to see how much better I could do that simple first project where I wanted to be a 10x software engineer. Um, but anyway, that was my first experience. That it was pretty clumsy, didn't get very far. You've done a lot of experimentation. Teach me how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so I very similar. So my experience has been, and this is probably why I'm a little bit of a laggard in terms of adopting it. As you highlighted, we come from the enterprise space, and my enterprise clients are not quite as far ahead as the folks in San Francisco. So what we have is we're probably I'll be generous, maybe 6 to 9 months behind. Sometimes it's a little bit more. So I grow up using the tools that my clients actually use. And what that practically means is, yes, we're in cut and paste jail a little bit, but here's what I do know is I know the shortcomings of that approach, and they're pretty darn significant. So for
Right.
example, as I cut and paste these things in, that's really simple if I have a monolithic program, even if it's a few thousand lines long, which may be stretching it, but let's say I have one program, fine and dandy, it works reasonably well. But if I actually decompose the program properly, like a good software engineer would, I would have modules, and all of a sudden I'd have maybe 10 or 12 modules, and they'd be compartmentalized nicely. And then I make a change in one of them. What happens is the context, the LLM forgets some of the previous modules and what I actually had in there, and it starts to make things up. Inevitably, what happens then is it breaks. So first off, the first step of moving forward is understanding the weaknesses or the challenges that you're having. So awareness, first step, got it. But here's what these things actually do really well is if you can actually, well, here's the thing, the context, if you will, the corpus is actually the GitHub repo. And if you can
Yeah.
actually make that repo accessible, all of a sudden the LLM, as it tries to build its context window to address a specific development request, it actually has the right information. It has the most timely, up to date information, and it solves the practical problem where cut and paste fails. So this is the right way to go. And I admit publicly I'm a laggard, so forgive me, John.
Well, no, I remember part of the challenge is that a lot of enterprise customers we were working with couldn't use AI tools. And so they weren't allowed. And so if you wanted to check your code because you know there's a bug in there somewhere or do some decomposition of some pretty gnarly stuff, you had to cut and paste. And, anyway, I don't want to talk about that too much. But I think the big difference was a generation of vibe coding tools came out like Replit and Lovable where you could generate a UI and a web page. And then they just kept adding capabilities and more capabilities to it. And so that generation of vibe coding were coding agents as well. Like they were running in the background and building code and checking it in and testing it and all kinds of cool stuff. But it felt like not that they were toys, but they were generating a Git repo because they were designed for people that weren't software engineers. And so if you were a true software engineer, you wouldn't start like that. That's a greenfield approach that doesn't exist in the real world. You would actually start with your existing Git repo and say something intelligent about this, decompose this. I want to teach you how to think about the architecture I've built around my code repo. And now I want you to go build some stuff around it. And I think that's the cool part about where we are now. We're starting to see a lot of advancements in how the coding agents can collaborate. You could have multiple agents in the same Git repo. Now that's considered an art still, how you limit multiple agentic developers from not checking in and killing each other's code. And so, we're on the front edge of that. But the reason San Francisco is so advanced is not something in the water, but rather all of the tech companies that are using it internally and measuring their engineers by how much more productive they can be, and the productivity gains for senior engineers and junior engineers that get it is starting to be very significant. And that's a lot to say about coding agents. And those were the
Yeah.
those maybe I've spent too much time framing that piece up, but let's talk uh, add anything to the conversation about strengths and limitations of coding agents.
Yeah, sure. So here's where I actually find them extremely helpful. In fact, I find them outstanding. So where you have a user interface, um, all the work that I've done, I mean, I've done a few UX projects in the past, and here's one thing I know is some of my UX compatriots may not like this, but I rarely enjoy going down the React TypeScript path. I'm much more of a back end developer. But here's the thing: is it plugs the gaps in some of my skills and capabilities, and it does an amazing job in the UX side. Here's why, though. I think is because what it gives you is that speed of iteration. You can do that much faster. And the UX gives you that ideal feedback vehicle. So you get immediate feedback, you can tune it. Um, that's the power of the coding agents today. That's the sweet spot. They do other things. But here's now some of the challenges, I think, and this is probably a good transition to the enterprise side, the enterprise agent side, is when I look at the things that when I use the coding agent, however I use it, the challenges that it has are really around enterprise grade concerns. So they have challenges around doing security well. They have just challenges with distributed computing capabilities. They have challenges when you have to integrate multiple products. So for on the identity side, maybe you're using Keycloak or something like that, or you have to connect into Okta, a SaaS service type capability. But what ends up happening is that's where the whether it has limited information, or it's just the lack of coherence or loss of coherence as it tries to juggle too many things. I don't know exactly what the challenge is. I'm pretty sure they're going to figure this out in a year's time. If we were to do this podcast, I'm pretty sure they'd have this figured out. But that is today is the challenge that you face in the enterprise world. Now, there's a few more, and this is probably where I'll transition. Here's the key differences that I find, and they're kind of riffs off of what I mentioned earlier. John, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I got an email from a colleague, and they were talking about KYC in banking. You and I know KYC, KYB, know your customer, know your business. And they'd said, well, yeah, we're working on KYA, know your agent. And I thought, huh, that sounds like something we were talking about in the trust episode, but also as an ecosystem service that there's really, I mean, I haven't done any meaningful research in this area, but it looks like a desert with tumbleweed rolling by. I don't know what your experience is, but it feels pretty
Yeah.
uh, early.
Well, I think it is early stage, and I think that's emblematic. So you can characterize that under trust. You can characterize that under some technical capabilities that build up to trust. But I think the KYA, know your agent, is actually a very valid thing to consider, especially in the enterprise space. So now here's the things that I find. If you're focused on building, if you're using coding agents, you may be individual performer, or you may be working in a very small team, but the scope of the work is small. In the enterprise space, it spans teams, it spans business process, may even span organizational units and jurisdictions. So you actually have to think about, and that's the challenge, as I mentioned earlier, where you may run into some gaps in terms of LLM capability. Knowing that, business knowledge matters. If you're working with a coding agent, you're a small team, you may have all of the knowledge that you need to build the application. In the enterprise space, it's rare that you find any individual that actually has enough knowledge to actually build capabilities across jurisdictions, let alone business processes, even let alone teams. So larger team coordination is a fundamental concern that you have to think about. It's, as I mentioned, it's processes versus projects. And processes by their very nature require multiple teams. It requires a very intelligent way around how you distribute the system capability. So architecture matters, not architecture in the small, architecture in the large. What are the macro level components? How are they going to talk? Microservice come into play. So there's a lot of different things that you need to think through when you move into the enterprise space that, again, there's lessons learned from the coding agent space that we should definitely use and apply to the enterprise space. But there's still some challenges that you have that are unique to the enterprise space that the enterprise agents will actually have to address.
Okay, well, so like let's make it real so that we can talk about an example of this because I think our superpowers exist in the enterprise space. And so, back when I was a consulting practice manager, partner, or whatever I was at Accenture, very important person, I believe. Anyway, I used to run a practice that had HCM, FNPM, CRM, all of the RMs, customer relationship management, human capital management, financial performance management, whatever, right? There were those were the days of SaaS products just sort of taking over. And so Salesforce took out a space and Workday and et cetera, et cetera. And so in the modern enterprise agent context, one of the discussions that everybody's having around here in VC land is what is the future of software as a service? Do we still have CRMs, HCMs, or FNPMs, or right, or EPMs? Or do those go away? And when I think about what you were saying, I think you were saying that if it's a process in a business unit, like customer onboarding or customer service, that'd be in the CRM system. But it's when the CRM system needs to talk to the human capital system or to, maybe you're doing, if it's a call center and you have humans involved, you're managing, the list of agents that are on the phone and you're scheduling and workforce planning. So there is a relationship between humans and customer service. And so that interaction between SaaS platforms, I think, is really where there's a wide open space that is being talked about with very little provable experience. And what I mean by that is, like you said, coding agents deal with the project. Enterprise agents deal with processes. And if they span multiple business units or functions, dude, that's not solved here in California, right? That's not its superpower.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of stitching tools, but it's kind of like the biggest joke in town that nobody ever created the glue between those products. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's actually a very good discussion. So let me characterize it this way: and I was talking to, and I'll talk about this with you a little bit later. I was talking to a client today, and that is exactly the dialogue they had. They said, "I have Salesforce over here, I have ServiceNow over here, and I have some Microsoft stuff over here. And every one of them has their own agent tools." And the question was,
Yeah. Yeah.
these are at the edges of my business, if you will. They're important. They're edges of my business, but I do X and they don't do X.
Yeah.
They do something different around
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
edges. So the dialogue was this: is what we need is where today we have BPA or BPM, business process management tools, or business process automation. We also have RPA, robotic process automation. Yeah, one can debate how successful that was. There's a lot of vendors that made a lot of money. There's a lot of people that made a lot of money on this, but here's the thing: what ended up being is quite brittle. What ended up happening was that things were very, very brittle. But that being said, what we need is agentic process automation, APA, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing that In the old world, we would use APIs to stitch together discrete systems. What we need, though, is APIs plus intelligence agents that manage and integrate
My
the business
God.
process
Now,
capabilities.
can I just, sorry for talking over you, my friend. I just feel sometimes we in tech or we in engineering land want to create an acronym for yet another idea. So, oh my God, if we're talking about APAs and APIs, I feel like we're going to lose everybody. And what I think, and so this is, and the reason I want to, I want to make a manifesto, a statement about why we're doing this podcast. I think part of it is to create uh, AI literacy on the problems that a lot of people are seeing. And we're just going to say it out loud. And we're not going to necessarily say that it's called APA or, whatever acronym a VC wants to generate revenue around their venture investments around. But I think it is clearly known that integration space between these giant silos that all want to be the one vendor that rules them all. I think that game, which we've been playing since the dawn of computing, since the dawn of software and SAP and Oracle and applications, I think that game is going to get much more complicated, and it's going to force customers to really have to say, who am I going to bet on that I believe is not going to lock me in, but is going to follow an open standard approach to designing, architecting, designing, trusting, evaluating, all the words that we talk about needs in the ecosystem. We're going to have to really get thinking about how we protect ourselves, enterprises, and people that help enterprises from the software vendors that just want to have one standard. And they're doing it because they want to move fast. But if we don't have open standards, we're all stuffed. Anyway,
Well, I think it's important. But my sense is this is what I'm finding, at least the people that I'm talking to, while they're aspiring to great things, they do know that Salesforce, Agentforce, is not going to be the agent framework that's going to span all their business process. They know that ServiceNow, despite it having some great agent capability, is not going to be the agent framework that spans their business processes. They are actively looking for a framework. We think agent frameworks fit the bill. There may be others, but we think pretty strongly around agent frameworks. But they think and they know that they need a vendor solution that is neutral, that is open, based on open standards. And I
right.
think you're spot on, John. That is exactly
Right.
where the industry needs to go. And quite frankly, I think though it's starting to go there with things like A to A, agent to agent protocol, and things like that. So I think the light at the end of the tunnel is a welcome sight. Actually, I think.
Yeah. No, and it's classic. To move fast, you build and you don't make standards. Then you hope that the vendors that are moving fast will come back and donate their standards to open groups like MCP. I think Anthropic donated that. And so it became an open
Mhm.
standard. But but let's bring this all the way back around. We've talked about enterprise agents and how we think that they're the business contexts in between these business functions are really the problem that enterprises have. They've got a 10-year-old Salesforce service system. They got a 5-year-old Salesforce marketing system in a different instance. And they've got some Oracle financials over here. They got some dynamic CRM. And it's now in the olden days, big consulting would say, well, we'll create one. And, we used to, for any major global 500 company, they had a project called One Coke, One Pepsi, One Nestle, One BP, where they tried to standardize all of their processes across the patch with one. SAP, or that was a wild failure. And I think in this agentic world, we're going to have so much of a push from agent oriented companies or agentic companies that we're going to create a lot of chaos and complications, and it's going to be complex before it gets complicated and then simplified. And I think that's the journey we're going to see. And
Yeah, so first off, I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a wide open market for that ability to orchestrate agents, multiple agents from different vendors. That being said, I think there is a common substrate that is specific to enterprise agents. I call it enterprise grade agents, but you never build one agent, you build an ecosystem of agents. We believe soon there's going to be thousands, maybe millions of agents in every enterprise. So you need an enterprise grade agent ecosystem. We've talked about it before. I won't go drill it down, but here's the basic, version of it. Enterprise grade agents and the enterprise grade agent ecosystem that they should run in are secure. Every agent has an identity. We trust them, and there's a governance process to verify that trust. They're reliable. They're explainable. They're traceable, they're operable. These are all things that are table stakes in any enterprise that I've ever worked in, and I think that you've probably worked in. That's the common substrate that needs to be the foundation for every enterprise agent. So I think we know the requirements, and I think we're still looking for an open solution that sits on top of some of those things.
yeah, and dude, that's why I'm excited about doing this podcast with you as we follow the history from the front row seat where we get to comment on it. So let's bring this back around. I think we've talked about coding agents, the evolution of coding agents from, cut and paste to vibe coding to real coding agents and real mastery. And there's a lot of work going around architecture and capturing that. And so I think we've talked about that. I think we've talked about some of the limitations of coding agents. And and the need for architecture, right? That doesn't go away. And the need to think about agents as needing as much guidance as kind of a junior developer on your team. You can give them a project that's in an isolated repo, but you don't want them to pollute the whole code base. So you want to treat them as more junior engineers. And I think what the software engineers I'm hanging out with are saying is that they feel like they're managing more than coding. And so I think that to me was sort of the aha. So are you telling me software engineers are now need to focus on asking business questions? And I thought, hooray. I think there's an opportunity for coding agents to help software engineers get even closer to their business and enter this realm of enterprise agents where asking good business questions is, table stakes for understanding the context required, as we've been talking about in the past couple of episodes.
Yeah, I'll just leave one maybe pithy comment, I suppose. I think what we're having with coding agents meeting enterprise agents, it's the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. But here's the deal: when they come together, you're going to have explosions and excitement. And you know what? I can't wait. I can't wait till as these things come
I
closer and
know.
closer together, my friend.
Yeah, no, either can I, but let me just give you one story. So I was at a hackathon and these guys had there's dozens of agentic companies that do coding agents that try to create enterprise agents. So they said, "Hey, try our thing." And I said, "Okay, hey, it doesn't integrate. I don't want to expose it to my Google account." They say, no worries, just create a burner account. So create a burner email account, create a burner Salesforce account. Like literally the amount of complexity that we are creating to allow these agents to work is going to be mind blowing. And so I think, yeah. Anyway, till next time, to be continued.